In the dead of night, the young man's body drifts towards the shore. His shirt lies flat like windless sails, the gales blow no more.
Good evening and welcome to Tuesday Folk People. My name is Maddie Leedham, and this evening we're going to be joined by an artist who's been described by Mike Harding as one of the finest singer-songwriters this country has ever produced. Former half of the Panic Brothers, this artist has released around 14 albums as a singer-songwriter to much critical acclaim, and has worked with some of the top names in British music, including Jackie Oates, Hank Wangford, Pete Townsend, Harbottle and Jonas, and many more. This artist has achieved so much throughout his life, and that's what we're going to explore in this interview today, along with some exclusive musical performances. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the wonderful Reg Meuross this evening. Let's welcome Reg to our online studio. Hi Reg, how are you?
Hi Maddie, I'm good. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. I'm absolutely loving your background because you're in Halsey Manor at the moment, aren't you?
I'm in Halsey Manor in the Folk Centre in North Somerset. Yeah, I'm running a songwriting workshop. So I'm in front of the baronial fireplace here. It's off. And the other room is full of songwriters. There's 15 crazed songwriters writing like mental in there. So
yeah. And so for any of our audience who don't recognise that fireplace, that's actually in the reception of Halsey Manor. So there might
be a little bit. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Just to let you know that it's just the hustle and bustle of a folk music centre. Brilliant. So I think that we should introduce your first song and get everyone to hear your voice, whether it's for the first time or whether they're lifelong fans. So the first song that we've got today is The Band Played Sweet Marie. Can you tell us about this before we hear it?
I read this newspaper article about the Titanic violin, and how it had been after 90 years of basically sitting in a loft in Lancashire, in Colne in Lancashire. And the story is that the violin was given by Marie to her, Marie Robinson, to her boyfriend, her fiancé, on their engagement. And her fiancé was Wallace Hartley, who was about to become the band leader of the Titanic. This was his big, as you can imagine, the biggest ship in the world, and Wallace gets the job. And of course, Wallace goes off, and as you know, when the ship was going down, the band continued to play. And so this is I'd like to think that he was playing a song for his sweetheart, Marie, back home. And the violin, when it came time to put the violin into this big leather case, and he strapped the case to his chest. And so when his body was recovered, it was recovered with this case. And but Lancashire to Colne, but there was no detail of what the case contained, so nobody but his immediate family knew that the violin had survived, and so it just sat there for all this time, and it was found about 10 years ago now. And once it was found, of course, it then had to be authenticated because such an iconic instrument could be faked, because it was obviously very valuable. And so what they did was she'd had a silver plaque engraved with the details of their engagement and attached to the violin, which helped to authenticate it. Then it came up for auction, and I wrote this song, and then I was invited to go and meet with the Titanic violin, which was a very moving experience, unusually so. I bought my love a violin so he could play for me. I bought my love a violin to calm the waves of the stormy sea. Though he'd be gone the longest time, he'd return my darling played, took further away my love from me. My name's Maria Robinson, he called me Sweet Marie, and that's the song that all night long my darling boy would play to me. All through that long remembered night I heard that melody, and the notes he played while a few were saved took further away my love from me. That ship went down to the mournful sound of my sweetheart's violin. With no safety vest he strapped to his chest the case he'd placed it gently in. Though the icy water froze his breath, it never froze his heart, and a pact was made by the tune he played, my love and I would never part. I bought my love a violin so he could play for me. I bought my love a violin to calm the waves of the stormy sea. There are those who say Wallace hardly played nearer, my God, to thee, but our souls were bound when that great ship went down, and in my heart the band played Sweet Marie. In my heart the band played Sweet Marie.
So the tune that you use in the band that played Sweet Marie, that tune has a connection to the actual Titanic ship. Have I got that right?
Yeah. Well, it's a kind of an adaptation in a way. There's some controversy over what tune they were playing as the ship went down. Obviously, it took a long time, and it was a very, you can imagine there was all sorts of screaming and water whooshing, and it would have been an extremely traumatic event. And but they were instructed to continue to play to try and keep the passengers as calm as possible. So they. Some people remember them playing a sort of tune called Autumn Leaves. Some people remember the most common one is Nearer, My God, to Thee, which is a hymn. And so what I did was when I wrote the song, in order to try and evoke some of that atmosphere, I suppose. And what I did was I listened to Nearer My God to Thee, and the tune I've written is my own tune, but what I've done is kind of based it around that sort of phrasing, if you like. And so he pointed out to me that you could actually sing the lyrics of Nearer My God to Thee to my song, The Band Played Sweet Marie. I'm not sure if that's true. It possibly is, but the tune that I've taken a bit of poetic license there and made up the band, because I like to think that he played this song for his sweetheart, So there was a song written about the years before the Titanic went down called Sweet Marie. So I've sort of poetic license.
Brilliant. It's really lovely. Now, I think that we should explore more about you as a musician and how you came to be who you are today in the folk world. And when I spoke to you previously, you said something where I think you said the harmonies of the Beatles and the Everly Brothers, the soul of James Brown, Otis Redding, and Aretha Franklin, the intelligence of Bob Dylan and Gordon Lightfoot were all your influences growing up. But I want to especially look at Bob Dylan because I think you told me before that he is your biggest influence. Have I got that right? And if so, why is he your biggest influence?
I think it may be in a writing way, yeah. Wouldn't necessarily in a musical way, because I've listened to all of that whole sort of pop canon, from the '60s onwards, really. And my dad was a big Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole fan, so I had that kind of swimming around, and Dean Martin, that kind of the classic old ballads and stuff like that. So my grandparents were opera singers. There was a lot of music around, of all sorts. There was no genre really. But I think Dylan created a light bulb moment for me, very definitely. When I first heard the album with Like a Rolling Stone on, there's a song called Positively 4th Street. You've got a lot of nerve to say you are my friend. When I was down, you just stood there grinning. Which is this kind of acid, really angry song, about, it kind of speaks for itself, the people who want to know him now that he's rich and famous didn't want to know him when he was just a poor songwriter, scratching around Greenwich Village in New York. So, but it was the first time I'd ever heard anything like that outside of a storytelling format, where somebody was telling about the nasty bit in the play or the film. This was actually somebody with free speech just singing this song, by their own volition, and it really it kind of rooted me to the spot. I can remember hearing the sound as well, and the sound of rock and roll, really, I suppose, which isn't possibly what a lot of people think is this sort of heavy status quo thing. It is that as well, of course, but if you listen to that earlier, much earlier stuff, Dylan, if you listen to Dylan, there's lots of acoustic guitars, there's kind of jangly electrics, there's pianos. This is a great moment, and so from then on, I think it just made me feel like I could write about whatever I liked, really. Yeah. I could say the things I felt, and not, I'm not a soapboxer necessarily. I kind of have a grumble now and then, but I mean, I just felt that there was a license there to speak my mind. That whole singer-songwriting, storyteller thing that appealed to me greatly.
Brilliant. And so we've seen that your music collection had a big influence on you. Did your family have any influence on you becoming a musician?
I think my mum did, mostly, because my mum just loved music. She wasn't particular. She could play the piano, and she sang, but she wasn't. I wouldn't say she was a musician particularly, but she'd grown up in a more kind of highbrow musical family, if you like, because her parents were opera singers, Drury Lane and all that. So you can imagine. And later on, they did film music and film editing and stuff. Did the screams in Hammer horror films. So when you hear this sort of woman screaming, because the monster's coming in, that's my grandma. So there was that kind of, I suppose there was that air of theatre and sort of showbiz or something, you know, and my mum carried that through because my mum encouraged me to sing. I would sing for the family. I'd sing for my parents and stuff. When I was a little kid, I used to sing for my grandparents. I can remember being wheeled into the room with a little white grand piano and having to sing. But I loved it. It wasn't a chore. You know, I enjoyed doing it. Maybe, you know, that's kind of the show off, the stage persona in me. You know, I enjoyed showing off.
Yeah.
Singing. And there's certainly encouragement, and also she loved the musicals. She loved things like Oklahoma and Carousel, I remember, and you know, and my dad had this great collection of crooners, you know, the Bing Crosbys and all that. So yeah, there was a big influence there.
And your dad, was it a bugle player in the army? Was it?
He played. I don't think he was officially the bugle player. I'm not sure about that. I never got that out. But he played the bugle, and he played the harmonica, and so I remember he had both of these things lying around, and I would always, for some reason, it seems I remember the last post, da 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 da, you know, the song they play when people and I'd learned that on any instrument. It was kind of weird. I remember the first things I learned musically were that, and I learned how to play the bass. I learned how to play sort of rock and roll, dum 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 dum. So I kind of learned those things. It was only when I was about 15 or 16 I realised that if I could play a whole tune, I might be a bit more popular. I might not get on people's nerves quite so much. So I did. So then shall I tell you about the first gig?
Yes, please do. I was going to ask you about that.
So my mates turned up at the door one day and said, "You play an instrument?" And they knew that I played a bit of guitar. I had a guitar, and I sang. And I'd always sung. I'd always sung harmonies, especially. I was really, really good at. You know, if somebody was singing on the TV, I was really good at finding the high harmony. I loved doing that sort of Everly Brothers sound. And they said, do you want to do it? We've got a gig at Yateley Folk Club, which is where I lived, the village of Yateley. And I think it might have been one of the first folk club gigs there. And the headline was Peter Bellamy, I remember. And they, you know, I said, well, I can kind of go dum 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 dum, you know, but that's about it really. And I can sing, you know, but I didn't really want to go and stand on stage. You know, I wasn't that bold a child. You know, I was a bit shy and stuff. So I thought, well, it'd be much better if I've got an instrument and I can play. So I said, well, don't worry about it. I'll learn some songs. And we had, I think in those days it was probably reel to reel or cassette or something. So we had some songs. We had a little set sorted out. We had a couple of Woody Guthrie songs. We had I think a couple of songs. I actually wrote a song for this, and they had a couple of songs which they wanted me to sing harmony on. So I learned the chords, and I think I only really needed to learn 3 or 4 chords, you know, because you had these all elastic capos in those days, so you could change the key and stuff like that, and I learned about a 20-minute set supporting Peter Bellamy at the Yateley Folk Club, and that was my first ever gig, and that was, you know, no looking back really from that. And we sang 3-part harmony, so, you know, Crosby, Stills and Nash were around at the time, and so that you know, Our House and those big Crosby, Stills and Nash songs, and the Beatles, of course, you know, the harmonies of the Beatles. So we were making that kind of sound very early on, really. So, and there was a couple of, like I say, there was a couple of Woody Guthrie songs. I think we sang Worried Man Blues, and it's a little mix of folk and pop. Really.
So it was a real kind of birth by fire moment. You just dove straight into
it. It was, but I've had a lot of that through my career. I mean, later on, I did a lot of commission stuff, writing for TV, and so it was a good grounding for that. You know, you need to be, and also I think, you know, if you really want to do something, You know, if you're really motivated, especially in the arts, you know, then it's really just a question of doing it, because it's an expression of you and who you are, you know. And if you believe that you are the best person at being you and doing you, then whatever you put out is worth something. You know, it's you presenting yourself to the world. You know, so I think I sort of knew that fairly early on. I sort of thought, well, I'll be as good as I can, you know, and hopefully I'll pass muster. You know, people are like it. So luckily they did.
Yes, definitely. And more on where you went next after our next song, because it gets very interesting. And so next song we have is Shelley's Heart. Is that right?
Oh yeah.
What is this song about before we hear it?
Well, that's funny enough. That's sort of coming right up to date, really. That's from my latest album, Raw, which actually was all ready to go at the beginning of 2020, and we were all set to do a tour. And of course, you know, nobody did any touring after that. But I did three solo albums, because I realized after all this time making 14, 15 albums, using other musicians, using bands, using accompanists and stuff like that, great players. I'd never really done anything solo, you know, and yet a lot of my gigs are solo. I really, you know, it's the thing I love more than anything, is going out on my own with my guitar, my tenor guitar, my dulcimer, you know, and just getting up on stage singing a song. And I said, well, have you got anything like that? And I said, well, no, I haven't. I've got nothing solo at all. So I decided I'd do an album, and I wrote an album called December, and then I followed that up with an album called Faraway People, and then the latest in the trilogy was an album called Raw. And so there's I made three solo albums, also made them on vinyl, you know, very modern. And one of the songs is called Shelley's Heart, and it's a story of the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley and his death. He died on a boating accident in Switzerland. He was out there with his mates and stuff. They had a house out there, and so they decided, rather than having buried in Switzerland, they would cremate his body on the beach. And so they built a funeral pyre, and they put his body into the fire, including Lord Byron, Trelawney, Robert Southey, these sort of famous poets of the time, and Mary, his wife. And at some point in the proceedings, Southey noticed that what appeared to be Shelley's heart, this organ, had fallen from the fire and was still pulsating, still beating. And so he quickly wrapped it in a poem. It was wrapped in a piece of silk cloth, and then he gave it to Mary, who, of course, her claim to fame, apart from being married to the poet, was also the author of Frankenstein. So Mary received the heart very gratefully. Thank you very much. That'll do nicely. And she then wrapped the heart in a poem called Adonis, and then that was wrapped in a piece of silk cloth and then placed in her desk down in Bournemouth, where it remained for the rest of her life, and was eventually buried with her son, also Percy Shelley. But the interesting thing was that the New York Times, at the time of Shelley's death, decided they would look into this odd phenomena of the still beating heart. And the conclusion they came to was that the organ that Mary kept lovingly in that desk for the rest, actually Shelley's heart, but his liver. The reason being that a heart, when subjected to drowning and then great heat, as in a fire, would just simply shrivel up, whereas a liver, you know, with this great porous organ, you know, would actually contain the water for longer. And so when it was heated up, it's quite likely that it would still beat.
In the dead of night, the young man's body drifts towards the shore. His shirt lies flat like windless sails, the gales blow no more. Far away in England, Mary prays his soul to keep. His poor heart paused to beat its final beat. Peace, peace, the heart that does not sleep. The finest words a man can think or write down on a page. You wrote to voice your sympathy, your passion and your rage. You wrote them for the innocents, the dispossessed, the weak, for those who cannot fight and those who cannot speak. Peace, peace, the heart that does not sleep. Peace, peace, not dead, the heart that does not sleep. Your friends stand on the moonlit beach beside the funeral pyre, where your youthful beauty turns to smoke, your fire turns to fire. They weep the sad, the mad, the bad, the dangerous to know, till one cries out, see how his heart in flames of moonlight glows. They swear they see the fiery blood run free. Your heart still beats for me. Peace, peace, the heart that does not sleep. Peace, peace, not dead, the heart that does not sleep. Mary takes you in her hand and wraps you in a poem. Your verseless words, the king of words, returns at last to home. And with her love in slumber and the skill of her own pen, your restless words in clouds of fire will rise to beat again. Peace, peace, the heart that does not sleep. Peace, peace, not dead, the heart that does not sleep.
So a poignant part in your career, Reg, is when you were part of the Panic Brothers. I don't know if everyone can remember the Panic Brothers and all that sort of thing, but could you tell us about the Panic Brothers?
Panic Brothers was a reaction to both me and Richard Morton, who was my Panic brother, had pop careers. I moved to London. I followed the normal course. And, back in those days, everything was controlled by the corporates, EMI, CBS, Warner Brothers, all these big companies. Basically, the idea was to try and get a record deal. And if you got a record deal, then you got an advance, financial advance, and you would make records, and hopefully they would sell, they would catch on somehow, and you'd be a pop star, and you'd have lots of money and big houses and cars and so on. So this was kind of the tried and tested route. And so I signed. I think the first company I signed to was WEA, Warner Brothers, and I released a record, and then I signed to EMI, and I released a couple of records, and then I signed to Arista, and I released a record. So this kind of kept me busy for a bit, but it didn't go anywhere. The whole nature of that business was that they had lots of money, they'd record lots of stuff, and they'd follow the trends, whatever the trends were. And at that time, it was like Duran Duran and Talk kind of bands. And so we were all new romantics. I've got some very embarrassing record covers, which I'm not going to show you, of me in very weird clothes. But we kind of made, I still I still loved the music, you know. I still really enjoyed it, and what happened was both me and Richard were pretty much the same situation. It's like we weren't working, we weren't doing gigs, but we were musicians, you know. So we were kind of redundant musicians, really. You know, obviously, if it took off, then suddenly you'd be incredibly busy and have funded tours all over the world and stuff. But that didn't happen. So, you know, for us and probably thousands like us, we just sat around with a bit of money and a bit of going on holiday and doing not very much. And so we said, well, why don't we do it? You know, do it ourselves. So we formed the Panic Brothers, and basically at the time, Blues Brothers was a big thing, and so we 2 black suits, white shirts, bolo ties. I had hair, kind of swept back blonde hair. Richard had black hair, and so we had that kind of Everly's look going, you know. And then we did. We wrote songs about being on the dole, you know, which we kind of were, about being in debt, and you know, just life in London on the sort of breadline as a working musician at that time. And we wrote songs about that, and it was massively, instantly successful because I don't think there was anybody really doing it. Also, we were really lucky in that we were on the cusp of the pub rock boom in London, where every pub had a stage. You know, and there were bands like the Balham Alligators, Juice on the Loose. There were all these great bands, really solid sort of rhythm and blues, Tex-Mex, country, rock and roll, Americana, all these sort of bands doing live stuff. It was a great time to be in London, really fantastic. And there were no real duos. It was really like a band thing, and so there was us, and we were really portable. We could get up and we could just jump on stage, use the same microphones that were already there for the band, and we'd do 20 minutes, you know, and then we could go to another venue and do the same thing somewhere else, and people loved it because we got the crowd kind of going. You know, we had unlike what I do now, we did this very fast. Punky kind of thrashy sort of, but all very much in tune and all in 2-part harmony and all very melodic and you know, I'd like to think intelligent lyrics. You know, I Made a Mess of the Dirty Weekend. We did Living in a Bivouac, size of a 6-pack. I did a road, but I'm just not Jack Kerouac. And we did all this kind of poetry sort of song stuff. So it was great. It was really rhythmic, really fast, really appealing. And then we got a couple of big tours. We got a massive tour with Lenny Henry, played all over the country. And of course, after the pub rock boom, immediately came the alternative comedy boom. So people like Rick Mail, the young ones, Paul Merton, Julian Clary, Eddie Izzard, Joe Brand, all these people started to emerge. And because we had the comedy aspect of what we did, Richard was a natural comedian, very funny on stage, very funny with his introductions. Because of that, we fitted really well into that. So we were, you know, we just sort of seamlessly moved from between the two, pub rock and London was a place to be. It was packed with fabulous venues, you know, great little dives, you know, but all packed. I don't remember doing quiet gigs in those days. Everything was really rocking, you know. There was a Hope and Anchor, very famous for Elvis Costello and all those sort of bands coming through, Nick Lowe and all that stuff. And so we did that whole scene for 2 or 3 years and made an album actually on Topic Records, which is the folk company, you know, that's done all the folk stuff from the beginning. So that was great to be kind of part of that as well, you know. And so, you know, that album still exists. Either you can get it probably on eBay or something. But it was a great time. Yeah, it's really, really wonderful. And a great antidote to what we were doing, because we were really in the doldrums, you know, when you're kind of just waiting for the big companies to make a decision. And I mean, I had this thing, I had 3 record deals in a row. And in every case, the person who signed me, the first person to sign me was Dave D, as in Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, McIntitch, you know, something you won't remember, but some of the folks out there will. A big pop band in the 60s. And I was signed by him. And almost immediately that I got signed, he went off and made his own company, Double D Records. So one day I went into the office, nobody knew who I was, and this happened to me 3 times. That was the nature of the corporate business. You were really fodder. It wasn't unless you had a hit, unless you hit gold, that you weren't really anything. So we reinvented ourselves. We made it work.
So when Time Out describes you as social realism meets the Everly Brothers, would you say that that's quite a fair description of the Panic Brothers?
That was my favourite description, yeah, because it was spot on, really. We were doing, if you can hear the Everly Brothers sound in your head. I don't know if you can, but if you can, dream, 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 all those songs. If you can imagine that kind of really tight, close harmony, but in more of a rocky sort of punky sort of style, but with the same sense of melody and stuff, that was spot on.
Wasn't there an instance where you performed something like 15 gigs in one night or something like that?
Yeah, I think it was more than that. It was a charity pub crawl, and all the acts who were working at the time, they were kind of associated with the Comedy Store and Jongleurs and these sort of places. So there was people like Jeremy Hardy, Paul Merton, Eddie Izzard, Joe Brand. You imagine what it would cost you to book that lot now. It would be it's this fantastic concentration of performers and comedians. The Rubber Bishops. The Rubber Bishops were Bill Bailey. That was Bill Bailey's duo. It was him and another guy, and that was the only other. There was those in Skint Video, but the only other musical comedy acts, really, and there was us. So there's all these acts, I don't know how many, 20 or 30 acts, and there was 20 or 30 venues around London, from sort of Twickenham in the south, Richmond, right up to Hampstead and beyond, Golders Green and all that. There was venues all over London, and we were all assigned a driver, and then we were taken from venue to venue, and we get to the venue, there'd be Mark Steele and Jeremy Hardy waiting to go on, and they go on and they do their 5 minutes, and then Jeremy would go on and do his 5 minutes. Then we rush on, we play a song really fast, and then we get back in the car and we go shooting off down the road, and so there, it was mad. It was this sort of comic mayhem, in London. It was really fantastic, and by the end of it, of course, we're completely dead. But what a thing, it was great to be part of something so positive, something that we were all having a great time, and we were raising money for charity, so it was brilliant, great gig. I
mean, the Panic Brothers, as you've said already, with the tour with Lenny Henry and all of this sort of stuff, you were really successful, and you were on something like, is it Channel 4's Night Live show or something?
We did Friday Night Live, yeah.
That's it, yeah. The Friday Night Live show. I was watching a clip of that, and someone said in the comments that they had it as their wedding song, or one of your songs was their wedding dance, their first dance. And so you clearly had this amazing success. What do you think it was about the Panic Brothers that was so successful, considering that you were hoping to get a pop career and that wasn't taking off? Why did the Panic Brothers suddenly take off and succeed?
I don't know, it's always hard to say, isn't it? But I'd sort of like to think that it was because we were authentic. What we were doing was real. Also, it was well presented. It was really. It wasn't sort of. We weren't just howling and making a racket and soapboxing and stuff like that. We were doing good music. We were writing good music, and we were performing it well. In spite of this sort of the mayhem that surrounded it, it was very, very tight. I mean, if you listen to the album, you'll know what I mean. You see the film clip. So, and I think there was a gap. Maybe there was a gap in the market for that. People like the Everlys, those Americana duos, the Louvin Brothers, the Blue Sky Boys. All these people weren't touring anymore. That had all kind of died away, and so this was very fresh. It was a format that's been so successful over the years, and we just fell into the comedy, pub rock, Americana genre, and we filled that gap, and we were very portable. That was another thing. So for the comedy, a stand-up comedian is about as portable as you get, isn't it? They can just turn up, stand in front of a microphone, make people laugh, walk away. And we could virtually do the same thing, even though we had 2 guitars and a banjo, we were still very portable. So that worked well. And we were nice.
If you do say so yourself.
And we looked presentable.
Yeah. So I think that it's time now that we go for our third song. This is very different from what we were just talking about. We're completely changing mood here. So we had the comedic brothers. Now we're going for something a little bit more intense, a little bit more deep. And that's your song, Good Morning, Mr. Colston. Can you tell us about this before we hear it?
Yeah, that's leaping right forward to a project now that's in development, and it's a song cycle based on the the transatlantic slave trade, and I realised that a lot of this was kind of centred around where I live in southwest England. The first commercial slave ship went from Plymouth in Devon, and the first town to petition for abolition 200 years later was Bridgewater, so just up the road from where I am now. And so all my work having been cancelled in 2020, there was no gigs, and so I got stuck into this. I had a couple of projects on the go. There was this one, there's a Woody Guthrie one, which we'll talk about another time. But the slave trade occupied my time, and then in that time, people remember that the statue of Edward Colston in Bristol came down, was pushed into the harbour, and the reason for this is that Edward Colston, who was a great philanthropist, and his money virtually built modern Bristol. He was also an official in the African Trading Company, which basically monitored and controlled and made the slave trade work, really. All the ships, they were all controlled by the Royal African Company, and so although Colston himself wasn't a slaver, he was certainly aware and responsible for the way they travelled, and and when you look into it and you think about these people had 3 feet of space, and which they'd be stuck for maybe 6 months, and no toilet facilities and so on. You think about all that, you realise, Colston was very aware of that, and yet he's celebrated as this great virtuous man. It said on his statue. So it's an interesting dichotomy, really, because the slave trade was seen then as something that proper, virtuous Christian men, Christian people would be part of. Everybody was part of it. It was seen as normal. But now in retrospect, we can see how abnormal it was, and how brutal and horrific it was. So I set about writing this song cycle, and one of the songs, because Colston is kind of unavoidable, really, is this song about Colston. It's a conversation between an ex-enslaved man and Colston.
Good morning, Mr. Colston. I see your ships come in. Will you pay $100 for my torn and ragged skin? 'Cause the master needs his coffee, and the master needs his rum, and the missus needs her sugar to make her sugar plum. Good morning, Mr. Colston. When will your kingdom come? They tell me, Mr. Colston, you're a God-fearing man. Did the Lord give you permission to take me from my land? 'Cause we're equal in construction. Did he render you the best? Do you hold a sacred license to burn letters in my chest? Good morning, Mr. Colston. When will your soul be blessed? Am I not a brother Mr. Colston, bless your generosity. It's thanks to you there's hospitals and poor folk property. It's thanks to you 100,000 souls were sold as slaves, and a quarter died in transit, and the ocean was their graves. Good morning, Mr. Colston, when will your soul be saved? Good morning, Mr. Colston, I see you on the strand. Beneath your arm the manifest, your Bible in your hand. Your sugar from Barbados, your coffee from Brazil. For each white child you educate, another black child kill. Good morning, Mr. Colston, when will your cup be filled? Am I not a sister on this earth? And black or white, each child agrees on every mother's worth. Am I not a sister on this earth? Good morning, Mr. Colston, your philanthropy is plain. There's hardly hall or street or school that doesn't bear your name. It's a golden chain that binds you to a poison legacy. No statue or memorial can hide your history. Good morning, Mr. Colston, when will your soul be free? Am I not a brother and a man, with the right to breathe the Bristol air and walk this pleasant land? Am I not a brother and a man? Good morning, Mr. Colston, I see your ship's coming.
So with this project that you're working on, that song is part of, who's working on it, and where's it going to go from here now?
We're currently looking for funding, but we've actually started recording. Funnily enough, we started here in Halsey Manor because I was awarded a bursary by Halsey in order to further this project. And so we've got some great players. We've got Jali Philly Sizoku, who is a kora player, and kora is that classic West African string harp. They call it the African harp. Amazing instrument. We've got him. He's some people at the folkies out there will have heard of Sekou Keita, and Sekou is Philly's nephew. So they're from the great kora family. So we've got him, and we've got Cohen Braithwaite Kilcoyne, who's from Granny's Attic, who you may have heard of. And Cohen is playing concertina and melodeon and singing. And then we have a singer, Jazz Gale from Totnes, also singing. So the project is called Stolen from God. And as I say, we're currently working on the funding, and we're hoping we're going to be doing an album this year, and then hopefully touring the end of the year. If not, then early next year we should be touring the show.
Brilliant. And if people wanted to be up to date with coming to see that show, which sounds amazing, would they look on your website and things to find
that? Would be the best place for now. Yeah, regmeuross.com for all of that information, all the gigs and projects.
Brilliant. Well, obviously we've seen with Good Morning, Mr. Colston, and with the other songs that we've heard today, that the Panic Brothers is not the only thing that you are well known for. And more recently, you are well known for being a formidable songwriter. I mean, you're hugely prolific. I think it's something like since 2004, you've written 14 albums, which is just mind-blowing to me. And I wanted to kind of now explore your songwriting a bit. And so in the Good Morning, Mr. Colston, it's very political. It's very kind of talking about morals and social justice and all that sort of thing. Is that a theme or the idea of things that you like to explore usually in your music?
I think it's just that, you know, I've settled on, from all my pop aspirations early on, and all that stuff. I've settled for being a singer-songwriter. That's what I am. So there comes a point when your career where you realize that this is what you're going to be. It's not just something you're going to do while you're young and fit and can jump around on stage. It's something you're going to do for a career for the rest of your life. And so having decided that, I suppose and also given the luxury of being able to speak, having an audience and being able to speak my mind, I kind of want to let people know what I think about things. And, and if I see stuff, like the second of the solo albums was called Far Away People, with the title song is about the austerity restrictions and, what the people who died from as a result of that. And when I see a story like that, or I see a story like the Colson story, the fact that this is the whole trade, the whole business behind the slave trade has been kind of not concealed, but not really spoken about properly for years. I guess I have a voice, and I want to use it in a informative and an intelligent way. And when I leave these albums behind, I want to leave something that makes sense, and hopefully in the folk tradition, in a way, it gives you an idea of what was going on in that time, and who the people were, and who the main players were, and you I suppose if you listen to my albums, you get some idea of the social climate of the time that I lived in. I just want it to leave something worthy, I suppose, something that makes sense and sounds good.
Yeah. So in some way, you're documenting our current times so that they can be remembered in the future. But also, are you trying to evoke change at all with that?
Awareness more than change. Of course, I like everybody. I would like change. Certainly at the moment. With what's going on in government, I feel like we're being openly insulted every single day by our government. I can't help feeling that, and that's not because I'm a political person. That's because I'm a human being who lives, under the restrictions and the guidance and the protection of this current government. And of course I can see the iniquities. I can see what's wrong with that, and I can feel the lack of security and safety that we're subjected to every day. So of course I'm going to speak out about it. I don't have no. I'm sure what I say doesn't make any difference to them, but it makes a difference to me to be aware of it, and to the people that I play to, the people I go out and I sell my records to. Those people get it and they understand it, and I think between us it kind of creates a kind of solidarity, which is important. To be aware of your fellow humans and look out for them.
Yeah, definitely. And why do you think that music, predominantly folk music, is a good medium for doing that?
Mainly because it's real. Folk is probably one of the few genres of music where you can actually go out and you make the club scene it's mostly fairly intimate. There's no real big stars in the folk world. So you can go to a gig, you can go and meet them afterwards. Even some of the bigger acts, you can, there is that contact, and they're all on social media, they're all on Facebook and stuff. And I think in a way, folk music has continued its. The festivals, you go to a festival, folk festival, you'll find the same people there year after year, and their families growing up. I know kids who've grown up from Sidmouth Festival who've been to every festival all the way through, and now they're now in their 20s and 30s. So that there's that sense of a living music and story tradition, which you don't get from pop music or from Family Idol, big, whatever it's called, those things. You don't get that sense. That's all about pulling you out from the crowd and putting you on a pedestal and creating a star. That's not about the people really. It's that's a different thing. I'm not knocking it; it has its place, but the kind of music I'm interested in is the kind of music that we all share and we can all be part of.
And so, because of that, because you're trying to just literally, as you said, detail the current social climate, is that the reason why you're so prolific? Because it just comes out just detailing what's going on at the moment.
I just love writing songs. I do enjoy it, and I enjoy this. Like I say, I'm on a residential now. I'm teaching. There's 15 or 20 songwriters in that other room there of all ages, and they're all learning, and they're all discovering the joy of writing, or they're expressing the joy of writing songs, and I just love doing it. I love the freedom it gives me, to express myself, in my own way. I just enjoy doing it. I remember a little kid. I went to somebody's house once, and she had a visitor, her own little visitor book. She's only about 6, 7 or 8 or something, and she said, "Can you write something in my visitor book?" And I just came up with, and it was, "What do you want? What do you want from life?" And I wrote, "Someone to love me, a house by the sea, a new song for breakfast, and mushrooms for tea." And that just about sums it up for me. That new song for breakfast thing was something, there's nothing more golden and glowing than waking up the morning after you've written a really good song and thinking, "I've got this, this is really important." And then the thrill of taking that out and singing that song to people and getting their reaction, it's, I know what you mean, I know how you feel, and it's a great way to communicate, and it's a beautiful way to communicate, if you do it right, I think.
I completely agree. That whole thing there is just
Good.
very poetic and very relatable. I think for anyone, even if they're prolific or not, as soon as they have a song, it's just the nicest feeling. We are running out of time now, so there's one more thing that I want to kind of go through, and that is your future and everything that you've got planned coming up. I mean, we've obviously heard about your project with Good Morning, Mr. Colston. Just remind me, what's the project called again?
Stolen from God. Stolen
from God, that's the one. So the other things that you've got in the works, can you share anything there?
Yeah, I've just there's 2 major things. One is I was asked by Pete Townes Van Zandt to write some songs about Woody Guthrie, and it was a particular project. And we started this a few years ago, and again during lockdown, it's escalated, and we're doing a thing called Fire and Dust, and that's now becoming podcasts, and hopefully it's an album. We've recorded an album. I've recorded an album at Pete's studio with a full band. And that will eventually become, I'm hoping, a stage show and podcast and so on. So that's in the works. And the more immediate thing is during lockdown, my lockdown project was recording an album of folk songs, which I did with this great young duo from Devon called Harbottle and Jonas. And they approached me during lockdown and said, "Do you fancy doing a collaboration?" And the obvious thing would be to do one of my songs. And I thought, well, let's do something a bit different. So I went back into my murky past and thought about the first folk song that I learned to play, and it was Lord Franklin. So I sent them that. It was actually, I learned the John Renbourn version, and I sent them that, and they just created this beautiful accompaniment, and with the wonders of modern visual science, they were able to create this little 3-part video with them and me singing this song, and I've just loved it. It was just, it made my heart melt. It was just lovely to hear this, and so I thought, well, let's do some more. So we did 10 folk songs, and songs that had some meaning for me, or just songs that I thought were great, and it would be nice to do in this way. And then at the end of lockdown, we went to a church down in Devon, and we recorded the album, and that's out now. It's called Songs of Love and Death. It is what it says on the tin, folks. And we've recorded that, and we're going to be touring that from April, March onwards. So also, if anybody out there is interested in this show, then do get in touch.
So if anybody is interested in watching Songs of Love and Death with Reg Meuross and Harbottle and Jonas. You can find it in all of the normal places, or you can tune in for our next Tuesday Folk People session, where we're actually joined by Harbottle and Jonas, and Reg makes an appearance because we hear She Moved Through the Fair that they recorded for this. So check out that. But for now, we have got one more song from Reg, and this is A Folk Song's a Song. And before you tell us about this, I just want to say a huge thank you for joining us today and for taking the time out from your course at Halsey Manor. And so, yeah, thank you very much for that. And can you please tell us what this song is about?
A folk song's a song is it's the words of Woody Guthrie mostly. It's something that Woody wrote when he was asked what is a folk song, which is a question that's been asked many times out there in the folk world. What is a folk song? And he gave this answer, and what I did was I just kind of turned the answer into a song, and Woody was a great borrower. He called it borrowing or saving songs. His most famous song, This Land Is Your Land, is actually a tune from another song, a previous song by the Carter family. He did a song famously called 1913 Massacre, and the tune he borrowed from a folk song. So what I've done, when Dylan did his tribute to Woody Guthrie, he used the same tune, the 1913 Massacre tune, and he wrote a song to Woody. And so what I've done is I've carried on that borrowing tradition, and I've rewritten Woody's words to that tune, to the tune that he and then Dylan and then now me has written. So that's what you'll hear is a folk tune that goes back through Dylan and Woody back into the mists of time, brought up to date with Woody's words.
Folk songs, what's wrong and it's how to repair. And it's who needs some food and who's got some to share. Who's out of work, who knows where the work is. Who's broke, and who knows where there's money to live. The folk song's a song that says you are free, and whoever you are someone to me. And this is your world, though it's knocked you around. This land is your land, and this town is your town. And I find any song says you're just born to lose. And I find any song says you're born to the blues. And I find any singer who says you're no good. My last breath of air and my last drop of blood. Hey, hey, Woody Guthrie, I wrote you this song. About a funny old world that's coming along. I wrote it to say I've been listening to you. Some hard traveling too.
Thank you very much for watching. To find out more information about our future Tuesday Folk People sessions, please sign up to our mailing list or keep an eye on our social media and website. Our next session will be a week from today at 8 p.m. See you then.